Wasserman. You may recognize me from my presentation at the UCLA ITS Downtown Forum. Today, in this session, we're going to talk about lessons learned from transforming transportation at the 2023 Arrowhead Symposium. But before we get into that, just two quick reminders. First is that as with the past sessions, we're going to be turning to Slido at a certain point. So as you have questions, log into Slido, submit them, and we'll pass it over to you at the Q&A portion. And second, out by the registration table, we have policy briefs summarizing sort of the key points and having links to the full reports for some of the research that we presented last session. So take a look at those if you don't have those already. This session is following up on the Lake Arrowhead Symposium on the transportation, land use, and environment connection. And for 33 years, UCLA has been bringing together policymakers, practitioners, and academics up at Lake Arrowhead in the mountains to discuss both the emergent and persistent challenges at the intersection of those issues. And Arrowhead is a pretty unique space. It's where people can be frank about the challenges they face in their work, talk about out-of-the-box solutions, make connections that they might not have otherwise made. And if you're interested in next year's, you can go to UCLA Arrowheadsymposium.org. But the rule at Arrowhead, it's the Chatham House rule. I don't know what Chatham House is, but that's what it's called, where you can take away ideas, but you don't quote people by name so that we can have frank discussions. Here at the Downtown Forum, we are trying to take what we learned at Arrowhead and bring it out into practice. So we have no Chatham House rule. Still hoping it'll be a frank conversation. But we have 4 incredible panelists, attendees, and contributors to Arrowhead, not just this year, but in past years, who have a lot of insight, I think, into the themes that we've been talking about, not just at the last Arrowhead, but in our presentations this morning and to come. So I'll just start with a big opening question and introduce each of you to talk about it. The theme of this in the last Arrowhead is transforming transportation. So from your experience, current work as a transportation user, what does it mean to transform transportation? So I want to start with Sarah Jepson, who's the Chief Planning Officer at the Southern California Association of Governments. I hear it gets good reviews. She is responsible for long-range planning, including the regional housing needs assessment and long-range transportation planning. So Sarah, what does it mean to transform transportation?
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me here today. I wish I had known that piece about the Chatham rules before we showed up, but no, I'm really glad to be part of the conversation. And you know, a big topic, how do we transform transportation? But actually, I think that topic is even bigger. If you want to transform transportation, it's really about transforming the region, because transportation is really a means to an end, and you have to figure out, you know, where people want to go and make it easier. You have to be looking at the land use, the housing, the economy, and how all these things are going to connect together in order to really address the issues that we have in transportation. So I've been at SCAG now for about a decade. And what I have seen in the 10 years that I've been at SCAG is really an expansion in our focus from, you know, solely looking at transportation and transportation corridors to really bringing in that land use piece and thinking about where future households and jobs will be located, to most recently being asked by the state to look even more closely at land use issues related to housing and why we don't have the level of housing production that this region has been thinking and projecting that we were going to be producing for the last many years. So to me, you know, transforming transportation is transforming the region. And so really glad to have all of you here today and continuing to work together to figure out how we do that.
Next, we have Emma Huang. She's a senior consultant at InfraStrategies, where she works with transit agencies across the country on the big issues they're facing. Used to be at Metro's Office of Extraordinary Innovation and Bruin. Emma.
Hello, everyone. So I have spent the past 2 years working on the private side for InfraStrategies, a consulting firm where I'm focusing primarily on strategic planning for transit agencies. And then I worked at LA Metro in the innovation office, so I have a good kind of practitioner perspective. And I spend the bulk of my time working with transit agencies who want to do a strategic plan. And it almost never happens where we say, why do you want to do a strategic plan? And they say, we just want to keep things going the way they are. It's typically because they recognize that something needs to change. And so the work that I do is really trying to get our clients to think through and identify more clearly what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And that can involve really pushing folks to not be bounded by the constraints of today and thinking through more of why do you think things are the way they are and what can we do to bring solutions to that. And that might involve thinking about things that need legislative change, or it might involve thinking about where you need new information. And so we do bring a kind of a research component to that. So excited to talk today about how we work with agencies to do that and some of my experience from that.
And next we have Chelsea Richer, who's a principal at Fehr and Peers, works on everything from first last mile policy, the transition to VMT measurement, transportation demand management, all sorts of other stuff, and also a Bruin. Chelsea.
Is this one on? Yeah, okay. So I was really inspired by our preparatory conversation for this panel. And I think we talked through a lot of the sort of problems that we might be trying to solve when we talk about transforming transportation. And I think the one that really resonated with me is landing on trying to solve the alignment problem between what's good for the individual and what's good for the collective, and not necessarily what's good for like the masses of individuals who value their personal costs and benefits around travel time and travel cost and the ability to control how they get around, but really bringing into alignment things that re-elevate the sort of existential collective crisis that I think we're seeing. We've heard about equity-driven crises, and it's sort of a power problem and a political problem. We've also heard a lot about climate crisis, and that is very much a collective existential problem. And then we have very real safety issues that are problems today, not just long-term, but things that we're trying to solve for collectively. And I think for a really long time, we've subordinated the needs of the collective to sort of the benefits of the individual. And we've heard from people in community engagement processes that really represent their individual perspective. And we talked a little bit about it being like a tragedy of the classic tragedy of the commons problem. But I think that would be really transformative, is to see our industry shift that alignment and really re-amplify the collective needs through performance indicators and solving all of those other problems like governance and funding and power and politics. But that would be really transformational, I think, is to start to see those priorities shift.
And last but certainly not least, we have Jody Litvak, who is the Executive Officer for Community Relations at LA Metro, has served in basically every role at LA Metro. Jody.
Thanks. Before I go any further, I just want to say, for all the years when there was complaints about panels that were all men, like, is this cool? Is this cool? Thank you. Yeah, I've been at Metro since, I don't know, the Ice Age. And I'm because we don't have the Chatham House rules, I'm going to say some things for the sake of being provocative. And you can figure out which of those things I believe in and which I'm just saying. But if we are going to transform transportation, we have to change processes. We have to blow things up. Processes, not things actually, not things actually. And we have to figure out how to get things done, That never happens. How to get things done faster, sooner, less expensively. Juan and I were talking about this the other day, and we talked about, for all the problems with CEQA and NEPA, and there are many, and they should be fixed, they also are the way that we do project planning And if they were to go away, we would have to replace them with something. I have a lot to say about the public engagement process, but I'll save that for further discussion as we go on.
So I wanted to come back to you, Chelsea, and a theme you raised. Do you think in terms of the alignment, before we set off on transforming transportation, are people in agreement of what we want to see out of the transportation system and the changes we want to make? And if not, how are we going to get to an agreement?
I think best case scenario, there's some agreement among people who are maybe in a position of decision-making power. And I think there's maybe growing consensus around the problems that are most important to be tackling from a research perspective. I think there's maybe a big disconnect between what the biggest problems are when it comes to hearing from the people who are using the systems that we're building and deciding how to prioritize. And I think without divulging too much to break the Chatham House rules, a lot of the conversations that I heard at Arrowhead were very different when they were outside of the panel context than when they were within the panel context and hearing from the experts and the decision makers versus some of the conversations that we had on the side. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Anyone else, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in. So I don't think that there is a lot of agreement of what, number one, the problem is that we're trying to solve, but then also what the solutions are, and then who should be responsible for those solutions. I think that in the work that I do working with transit agencies, even within agencies, there's not a lot of agreement. And I think what I've seen is there is a tendency to want to kind of stay within the confines of what kind of historically or traditionally the agency or the department have been responsible for. And that can be really challenging when you're trying to think about solutions that require kind of breaking those traditional structures. And so I think it's really important to try to encourage folks to think about things differently, to probe and try to get more at what the problem is. And then when you're trying to think about solutions, to actually be okay and be comfortable when you're kind of working in a gray area, and think about how transit agencies can kind of leverage their the role that they have in the community to either be a really good partner, either take a leadership role, be a promoter, be a convener. Those are kind of the different muscles that I think we try to encourage agencies to flex to really try to like actually implement solutions. But I'm happy to talk more about how we do that.
Yeah, please.
That too. I mean, we all have, come to this from very different perspectives. And my perspective is, working in a region of 6 counties and 191 cities, looking out into 2050. And so in the work that we do, generally on the major goals and what we want to accomplish, they're not particularly controversial, right? Like everyone wants better mobility, everyone wants an improved environment, everyone wants greater equity. And there's also, this need for economic growth. And so we're all at the goal level. We spend a lot of time talking about the goals, but generally there's consensus that we want to be heading in this direction at the 10,000 foot level. And then even down to the strategies, right? The next level in our plan, which are also the policies then that would fall under each of those major goals. We generally have consensus. It's not that controversial on the different types of strategies that you might have to improve mobility. I think what becomes tricky then is once you keep getting down towards the local level and you think about what those policies and strategies might mean for particular communities. And then I think once you get to the community level, what you see is a lot of time there's disagreement about the pace of the change. And there's a tension between folks who think that change should be iterative and folks who think change should be transformative. And I think we're seeing greater tension there right now with, lots of folks not, break the system, right? We're done. So a real impatience versus others who think that the patience is very important. So I see a tension there in pace. And then also in a disagreement about intensity, right? Like we can support this bike lane on our street. Everyone thinks we should have this additional option, but if that bike lane means that we're going to take away this this roadway capacity, then maybe we shouldn't do that. So big picture, I think we're kind of headed in directions, but then when you get towards implementation, you get a lot more of these tensions that exist when you're thinking about pace and intensity of a solution.
So I want to go back to Emma and talk about how agencies define problems, because we talked about that in the traction report as well. In your experience, kind of how do agencies classify the different problems? How do even in your work you classify the different problems that you deal with, and what are the differences between those categories?
I think it can be somewhat of a narrow focus sometimes if you're trying to think about a problem based on what's in your control versus what's not in your control. And often I think we can all agree that a lot of the solutions probably require more of an intersectional, cross-departmental, kind of cross-industry approach. And that can seem at odds with how agencies are set up. So I think it does require kind of being comfortable like I said, thinking in kind of a non-traditional way of what your role is and how you can do that. But that is challenging when you are working on at a micro level on a specific project, and the way that budgets are set up and processes are set up that are not allowing for that kind of cross-sectional approach. So I think one thing that we're working on with Lane Transit District is trying to figure out a better way for the agency to engage the community. And we are trying to get them to think about things that they haven't done before. So the idea of putting together even a community steering council was new for them. The idea of paying individuals to participate was new for them. But it was very important to have folks that are not the business community that's already involved, especially in an agency that is funded primarily by employer taxes. It was very important to try to be intentional about how we were building that community steering council to have the perspectives that are not traditionally on that, but that does require them thinking about new ways of doing things and getting around why haven't we been able to pay for folks to be on a community steering council? Why have we not had a CBO type of partnership before? So just trying to create a little bit more intersectionality in that.
In any of your experiences, have you seen instances where decision makers are treating a political problem as a knowledge problem? Asking for a study when perhaps the barrier is a matter of political will. I think we might have some people who've seen that.
Never, never. No, I was just, what's today? I think Tuesday I was in a meeting where we were talking about this. I have seen many times where, and by the way, as we were talking about agencies, what I was going to say, let's just remember that there are people, and let's think about who the decision makers and the policy makers are at these agencies. When you say the agency, anyway, I have seen many times where unnamed members of the Metro Board have asked for, when we are up at a decision point, or we are coming up to a decision point, and we probably have the votes, let's just say, and they will ask for either additional study, or they will ask for additional public engagement. And by and large, it is a performative exercise.
Or a pilot.
You might ask for a pilot.
It could happen.
Could happen.
But doesn't fit in with my narrative at the moment. But yes, and yes, not but, okay. And what it does is it gives them the ability to say to their constituents who are yelling at them, okay, you asked for more time, or you asked me to listen to you, and I have done that now. And so now I can make a decision. And given the nature of how decisions are made, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. You know, I've been there a lot. I will tell you, this is long enough ago now that I can tell you about this. When we were planning what's now the D line, Purple Line extension, and we were first starting to talk about in Century City coming off of Santa Monica Boulevard to come into the heart of Century City, which requires going under a certain well-known high school 90210. And we were meeting with a particular Metro board member who was peppering us with questions. And we had showed a lot of information about where at that point in time, Metro tunnels existed under private property and how it wasn't a problem. And we were getting peppered with questions. And I looked at that board member and I said, excuse me, in all the times this is like 15 years ago, you know, have you ever heard a story or seen a story or gotten a call from a constituent that they can't sleep at night and the china rattles? And that individual cocked their head to one side and got it in an instant, and then demanded that we do many more studies, that we bring in Lucy Jones, well-known Mama Earthquake, so that that individual had solid ground to stand on for their constituents. And at the end of the day, I'm glad it happened. But yes, I'll talk about that one, but there are many.
I would approach this maybe in a slightly different way. I mean, as a metropolitan planning organization, we've been asked for the last 10 years to develop a sustainable community strategy that shows how the region is going to achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And kind of universally with the other big four MPOs, what we keep telling the state is we need the strategies are, land use changes, additional investments in transit and walking and biking, and pricing. And so we get in a lot of trouble as MPOs that our plans are not delivering on the VMT impacts. But we've been telling you what the problem is for the last 10 years. There's just lack of interest in there's a political barrier in the main strategy that's going to make things happen, and that's pricing. So, we will continue to be asked to study and figure out, this and that and tweak our models here and there. But, I think that we've done the good work to figure out what the solutions are, and that I'm just going to agree with you that a lot of times the barrier is the politics and how you move something forward.
Yeah, I think I'll add that I've seen that play out, and where I've kind of decided how you move forward on that is I think it does fall to leadership, and I've seen both really strong leaders and ones that are just not willing to kind of take the risk of doing something that is new. And I've seen it happen on kind of a small scale, small agency where it is very likely that they're going to hear from their board members or the constituents, and then they're going to decide that's okay and that they want to continue and move forward. But they could very easily decide that they're not going to do that. So I do think it comes down to leadership, then empowering the staff to feel bold and feel okay to say that they're going to look into something that's a little bit scary, like pricing, or that they haven't done it before. I do think it kind of comes from above. And I think that part of what I do and part of the work that consultants can do is try to help our clients get there through the kind of probing questions and trying to habituate clients to think about what can they do that's still in their purview, that still can make a difference. So rather than just kind of settling on the kind of easy answer of like, that's not my jurisdiction, or we're not able to do that, trying to think and push them to think creatively about it.
And Chelsea, you had mentioned some of this comes down to framing. So from a board member speaking about an issue in their meeting to a survey that's deployed, the framing of an issue matters a lot in the way it's addressed. How do you see that in your work?
Yeah, I think this question is really tied together quite closely with the knowledge problem that you described, where I think some people feel like if only we had the answer, we could take action on it. And I think others come with the perspective of, we know the answer, but we just haven't figured out a way to frame the problem or the solution in a way that gets sufficient support from the public. And I think if we had support from the public, then we'd have support from the politicians and it would be smooth sailing from there. But I think that kind of like marketing question we grapple with a lot. And I don't know that we have a ton of experience, skill set, budget to pay for the kinds of marketing and framing that's done by the private industry sector of things. Like if you think about the advertising budget from Coca-Cola and how easy it is to convince people to change their behavior or try a product, there's, just so much money behind all of that mechanism. And the framing that we do of our transportation industry and our transportation solutions, and whether it's transit or microtransit or biking or walking, whatever the case might be, we operate on really thin budgets for things that often then get consumed into the public engagement budget or sort of tackled along the way as part of like a different need on the project. Like a fact sheet, like doesn't have the same kind of framing punch as something else from the private sector might. So yeah, I think the framing problem is a real challenge because it does, I think we're up against so much other noise that if we can't figure out how to frame the problem or the solution, we're operating in a space of like scarce resources to do so. But I think we're competing with a lot of other things that are pulling people's attention.
I want to give a slightly different perspective on that. I don't disagree at all, but it's more of a longitudinal perspective. And I know we all want these changes to happen right away, but we are having conversations today for concepts and language that did not exist 15 and 20 years ago. Okay, I mean, it's just, so we all need to keep leaning in and having that stuff and the conversation moves. There was no concept, at least in public parlance, of Vision Zero or the idea of bike lanes or bus lanes. I mean, I've been involved in projects that were like a big fight and now is like no big deal. I was telling somebody earlier today before I came here, when I was a very, 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 very young political aide, California was first starting to require smog checks on cars. And people called the elected officials' office as if we were ripping their children out of their hands. So yes, and it's not enough and it's not fast enough. And it is not hopeless, and keep leaning in and doing the work.
So on that, I guess you all are staff level, either in consulting or in the public sector itself. How do you as staff change that framing when you're not the decision makers yourselves, but you are developing policies and presenting them to your decision makers?
I think one thing that's helpful is when we are pushing for a solution or even looking into a potential policy solution that may make our client uncomfortable. It can take a lot of time to drill down to what exactly is their issue. And so having a lot of patience in trying to unpack that, I think, is key. And I also think that once we do understand that problem and what's actually driving the concern, we have been in a lot of situations where asking the person if, what would you suggest to be like an alternative if you can't do this, or can we accept that the way things are going now is not okay? Because I think it's just human tendency to find reasons why something can't be done. But if you can try to push the group, or if you're in the meeting, whoever's in that meeting, to help you think through the solution, that can be effective. But it still takes some patience and truly trying to understand, like, from their perspective, like, what is the obstacle, because it might not be as apparent as you think.
I feel like there was some pushback on pilots here a little bit earlier, but yeah,
I've done one. I love pilots.
I think part of how you build support is showing a different way, doing a pilot,
Yes.
trying to show a different reality than what people are used to. And we've done, again, back to our context of 191 cities, a lot of our work is trying to, find a handful of cities that want to test out a new concept, a dedicated bus lane, maybe even someone will do some pricing work. And then being able to show and reflect that value in a very local way so that other jurisdictions will pick up on it and move things forward. So in general, just very much supportive of those concepts. I guess one other thing that I wanted to mention is when you think about your audience and the types of examples you want to share, you need to spend a lot of time understanding their needs and their local interests so that the solution that you're proposing matches the problem that's in their head, right? So in our region, again, 191 cities, a lot of them small, under 100,000. A lot of the local elected officials that are sitting on our board, so it's like 83 cities that are part of our regional council, their transportation issues are not the things that you and I are thinking about. They're thinking about drop off and pick up at school, right? That is a major thing for a lot of our local elected officials. So recently we had a presentation from someone from the city of Los Angeles talking about quick builds and redesigning your streets for walking and biking and giving the example of changes in Koreatown to a drop-off zone. The most questions I've had from my board in years, right? Because we understood their local needs and interests and the pilot was in their context and helped them understand a different way for designing your streets to meet the local needs. So I think, again, understanding what they need, because sometimes you provide solutions that really don't serve their local problems.
So the only thing I would add to that, because I was going to say, understand what your decision makers need to make the decision. So understand their viewpoint, but what is it that they need? Do they need that extra study? Do they need an extra community meeting? Do they need data? Do they need sometimes when you've got people yelling at you, sometimes if you have data that can help. There's no one solution, but understand what they need.
So I wanted to turn it back to you, Jody, to talk about public input. Sure, you have thoughts, but I wanted to start with maybe a success story of where public input potentially changed the outcome of a project for the better.
I'm gonna come at it in a different way.
Please.
Which is, so first, when I said I was going to be provocative, let me start off by saying the public engagement process, I don't want to say it's broken, but it doesn't work in ways that people think what it's intended, what people think its outcome should be. It is fundamentally undemocratic. And the solution to that is not necessarily more public input. I'm going to get back to your question if I forget going back there and here's why. At the end of the day, the beginning of the day, at every time of the day, the people who show up are the people who are able to show up. The people who show up more often are the people who are against it. They are the loudest voices. They are not representative of what you are trying to achieve. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do public engagement, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it better. I absolutely think we should. Morally, we have to do it. Legally, we have to do it. But we have to understand what it is and what it isn't. And there are people who will never participate. I've been doing this for a long time, and you can social media them, and you can go out to where people are and all of that other stuff. And there are people you are not going to hear from. You're not going to hear from them because they're busy. You're not going to hear from them because they're not thinking about it. They don't have opinions about it. You're not going to hear from them because a lot of times in transportation, we're talking about linear projects. And they are people who are not in the project area. They're coming through it. They're going to use this future service, but they're not here and they're not going to show up. And then there are people who are not here because they are not here yet. These things and these changes we are trying to make are for generations to come, and they are serving and they are intended to serve people who are not here yet. And I don't know how you represent that to decision makers and get them to care about that as much as the people who are standing in front of their face yelling at them, but that's what I think about. So, success story. What I would say is recognizing that your loudest voices by and large are going to be your naysayers. Where's Alyssa? Is Alyssa still in the room? She and I were talking about this out at lunch. I think sometimes what my job is, or the job of the people I work with, is to try and figure out how to help our decision makers not be overly influenced by that. And believe me, I don't have a magic bullet. I want to have all of these discussions while we all figure this out together. Sometimes that means trying to help put that in perspective. Sometimes that means, okay, please, doors are closed. You have to try and kind of isolate those naysayers. You have to make sure people aren't giving them credence over that. So that's, to the extent there have been success stories, it's because of that, and try to elevate the voices or the thoughts or the needs of who's not yelling, whether they're not yelling because they're here walking around and they're not showing up and not engaging, or because they're not here yet. And it's hard.
I mean, I think about this a lot. The work that we're doing in lane transit district to kind of try to help the agency reset its relationship with the community, because kind of historically the way that the agency was working with the community was just resulting in a lot of standstill with regards to projects. And so we had to help the agency think about how they have an obligation to first determine who they serve. And I believe the agency and the leadership have decided that, like, if equity is important to them and at the end of the day they serve transit riders, then what can they do to elevate the voices of transit riders? And so there are going to be the people that they hear from the most, but what are the actions that the agency is going to take to actually go out and hear from riders? And so it can be difficult for them to participate, but I think, trying to kind of deploy a menu of different things to make sure that those inputs are getting considered is one thing that you can do. I'm not saying that it's like the silver bullet, but I do think that trying to be intentional about building up the all of the inputs. So if you know you're going to hear a lot from your business community, trying not to overweight your engagement methods to hear from the business community and actually hear from those that are riding the system. And that can happen in a number of ways. That can happen through rider surveys, quick inputs, things like that. And then if indeed the agency has decided that that's a policy that their board stands behind, then I think it can be up to the leaders and the staff to kind of go forward with that and say, like, why at the end of the day, like, if they serve riders, then why they need to amplify rider voices.
I really liked previously someone's, I think Tafari's question or comment about how we can be using some of the ephemeral activations, I think was the term he used, to shift the framing and also maybe find more successful ways at public engagement that truly does engage a larger swath of people. And one, I think, thread that I heard him say and have thought about on other contexts is like how much fun it is to engage. And I think the typical methods of community engagement that we deploy, even if they're like super equitable, super thoughtful, super community embedded, if they're not fun, people aren't going to keep engaging in it. And I don't know that a Metro board meeting is, I think some people find it fun. I think they're very interesting, but it's not like bringing the joy that a Cyclavia event would be. So I'd be really interested to think about engagement approaches that really prioritize how much fun someone is going to have when they come to engage in this space. And starting with that goal in mind, like, could we potentially get better engagement, better turnout. And we've seen this on small scale projects where we've really emphasized sort of co-creation of an art exhibit or co-creation of something. And there's like the draw is not, we want to hear from you about this project, but the draw is something else entirely. And then along the way, while you're having so much fun doing your activity, we also asked you about this other set of things. And yeah, I would be really interested to hear more success stories like that or see more examples of engagement that really prioritizes joy and fun in the process.
So I wanted to ask you, Sarah, the work you do is, very long-term, but because of that, it's very impactful. The decision SCAG makes on, for instance, the regional housing needs assessment is going to shape the future of the built environment in Los Angeles. And yet it seems like that's the hardest to engage with, in some sense, the hardest to get people to care about because it's not so immediate. How do you kind of square that and get people to give their input on something that in some ways seems so far removed?
Well, first of all, I would say getting people engaged in the 6-cycle arena was not complicated. It was the most intensive conversations at our board that I have certainly ever experienced. And in that context, or in that situation, while SCAG does not typically draw a whole lot of participation, when big issues and big decisions come forward, a lot of times we do. And it's thanks to community-based organizations who understand the impact of the decisions and get involved at those times and then effectively engage their elected officials to be part of the process. So let's see. I would say, in terms of not everyone is engaged, obviously, at that point, but I do think that the community-based organizations have done a pretty good job of raising awareness at key points in time, because and so it's important that they continue to be funded and have the training and education to know, to understand the policymaking environment and the most, again, meaningful times to be involved in the process. I was going to, on the, your success stories, in terms of engagement, I do think RENA for us was one of these success stories. Again, there were some major changes in state law that elevated the issues around housing and the region's roles in housing. And so community-based organizations, again, were very much activated and participated, and I think, did influence the decision that ended up happening at the SCAG board. Similarly, when we first started SB 375 and we did our first RTP SCS, the sustainable community strategy and the goals that we have for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it brought a whole new set of stakeholders to our conversations. There were public health advocates that all of a sudden, decided that they wanted to be part of regional transportation planning. In fact, I'm looking at the BSLEs, and we got involved with the Cal Endowment because the health community wanted to be involved in transportation. And so they did come and they advocated at SCAG. And from that engagement, we ended up forming an active transportation department and pursued many resources over the last decade to support local active transportation plans across the region. So again, I think when laws change, when processes change and new stakeholders are invited to participate in the process, they do change it. So that's my my glass half full perspective on the public engagement process.
I'm going to ask one more question here, and then we're going to open it up to Slido. So if you have questions, add those on your phones. Thinking big picture, a theme that I drew from Arrowhead was also that these changes tend to be additive, for better or worse. We think about microtransit and we add it on top of our fixed route service. We think about ambassadors and we add it on top of our policing and security. Be those as specific examples as it may, how do you do subtraction? How do you do change that you actually need to, you've come to the decision that actually something we do needs to stop or at least significantly change? Anybody?
I mean, I think we encounter this a lot just in our strategic planning work. We typically have a pretty robust period where we're speaking directly with various departments that will be responsible for implementing the bulk of the initiatives that are in a strategic plan. And it can be very tough to have someone, reasonably so, agree to do X, Y, and Z in addition to what they're already doing. And so it's pretty natural that the conversation is, if I'm going to be doing X, Y, and Z, what will I not be doing? And I think that has to become more ingrained when we're setting up a strategic plan and helping the agency think through what implementation looks like. It has to be kind of a natural follow-up, is if you're going to be doing all of these things, what are you not going to be doing? And so building that into the process of measuring progress for what's the progress that we've made in implementing all of these initiatives. It also requires, what did I stop doing? And that can be a hard conversation, especially when you have folks that have been doing things and believe in what they're doing, and you may be making a policy change or a directional change. But I also think that just at a kind of more macro level, the reason why there's ambassadors being added, or the reason why there's all of these other things, is because sometimes I think the transit agencies in particular are being kind of held responsible for solving a lot of social issues that they're not necessarily originally set up to do. And so that does look like taking on a lot more than they maybe be set up for. But I think it also is a natural thing when you see an agency have like a massive budget, right? It's very hard to understand why they can't do this new thing. So it does really require having some intersectional, cross-departmental, multi-industry conversations about who is best equipped to take on these issues and how can they do that, and what support do transit agencies need to give, but not actually own that piece.
I think to your point earlier, Jody, about agencies are comprised of people, and the work that they're doing is very personal and passionate potentially for those people. And I think the question of how you essentially divest from doing something that you've been doing for a long time is really tricky, because you're talking about people, you're talking about jobs and livelihoods, and people, like you said, who are super committed to whatever they've been working on. And I think a key point is that starting with really deep engagement with the people who will be affected by those changes or those transitions is a really important first step. And I've seen it in some of the work that we've done around EV transition planning, where the people who are the loudest opposition to investments in an EV transition are people who are protected or people who are members of trade unions who have been long working in the fields that are going to be divested from in order to transition into zero emissions or electrification. And I think in the sort of best examples of how that came together nicely is where the organization started with that deep engagement with the trade unions and really understood their perspective before coming out with a policy around transitioning and what that would look like. And I think ideally the finding a pathway that those people who are going to be affected are comfortable with, and ideally it's something that's maybe better than or more enjoyable or more fulfilling than what they're doing presently, is sort of helping to define that pathway. And it's not just shutting one thing down, but it's actually helping to transition those people and jobs and livelihood to something different. And it's really tricky, and I've only seen it done, a couple of times that I would say are great examples, but yeah.
And we haven't even talked about AI.
All right, so I'll turn it over to Slido or ChatGPT if someone submitted that.
Thank you. First up is Stuart Chesler.
You talk about external community engagement? What about internal engagement with employees? Like I find, I work for LA Metro, and I'm wondering as a mid-level staff person, how can I convince senior leadership or other people convince senior leadership that a program or a set of projects we're pursuing are not faring well, and we need to consider a different course?
I would hope, by the way, I'm going to turn this way. Just, sorry, guys. I'm just, I would hope, and no, this doesn't happen often, but I think a lot of times our employees, our bus operators, our mechanics, our service attendants, our schedule makers, they have a lot of really good information about what's going on. They're not always right, but they bring a lot of good information to bear, and I would hope that people are talking to them. And we don't always do that, and we should. So I don't have an answer for you, Stuart, but I agree.
One of the people who spoke at Arrowhead was my colleague, Katie Miller, who works at Fehr and Peers, but has sort of this organizational strategy and organizational management lens on her work. And I think channeling her perspective, if she were here, she would probably talk about the importance of creating processes within an organization to make sure that all staff are heard and that there's sort of pathways of communication to elevate and amplify good ideas, or sort of create that two-way communication channel where everyone feels comfortable and safe and heard in their role, and has a pathway to sort of elevate their perspective. So I don't know specifically in Metro how that's working, but yeah, I think there's a lot of, I thought her presence at Arrowhead was super helpful, and I've heard her speak before because she is my colleague, luckily. But I think the question of how we're looking internal to our organizations and fixing some of those issues is also a really important thing for our industry to be grappling with.
I would just acknowledge that this is a very challenging issue. As I started off with, in transforming transportation and transforming the region, everything that we're doing is becoming more intersectional. And so you're trying to have to figure out how to bring together new sets of people to get to the right decisions. And so really figuring out the communication channels and that are going to work for your organization, I think are really important. And, as someone at a staff level, I would say, leadership may not have it figured out yet, right? So we may not have figured out the best way to make sure everyone knows what's going on at the same time. So the most important thing you can do is ask, right? Because I think as someone who is in a leadership position, we're always, open to answering the questions that come our way, but a lot of times we don't know what they are. And particularly in this changing environment where, we don't see people in the hallway. We don't see people as we're eating lunch. Communication has become even more challenging, and we have 1,000 new tools that we all use, but we're over communicated to. So anyways, I recognize it's a big challenge and something that we all need to continue to work on, is just better communications, and that will help us work more effectively together.
Something that we try to kind of elevate when we're doing strategic planning is we typically we'll do a lot of outreach to employees that maybe work on front lines or they don't work at headquarters. And I think consistently we find that they may have information that is relayed to them about something about to start, but they are not told what came of that. And so we're trying to build into our initiatives, and when we kind of advise on engagement, is making sure that you're closing that loop. And it sounds really easy, but I think it if it's not done, it can kind of lead to mistrust. It can lead to feelings of apathy about when you're coming to them again with a survey, or you're coming to them again and saying, we have this new strategic plan, but you didn't tell them what happened to the last strategic plan, or you didn't tell them what you did with that survey. So trying to build that in, and also thinking through what processes need to happen in order to close that loop, I think is important.
Amy?
Thing on. Okay, this next one is anonymous and I promise it is not my own question. But building on the subtraction question and yet to be more direct, how do we stop adding highway capacity? I think that might be highway capacity and auto-oriented projects that might have harmful externalities, if I can read into that. So how can we stop adding highway capacity? I understand this is a huge question and very hard to answer well and to also keep your job. Or parenthetically, or even ask, note my anonymous moniker.
Let me address that one.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think this goes back to, again, something else I said early on, right? Like, I do feel like there is general consensus on the direction that we're all headed, but the big tension that exists is the pace of change. And there's a big tension between, you know, the voice that says, shut it down, don't do any more. And those that say, you know, we've been, you know, this project needs to be done because it serves this particular community well. So there's that tension that exists. And so, you know, I guess I feel like a lot of those in our position, regionally as a whole, we are moving in a direction where most of our resources are to maintain the system that we currently have, right? It's to maintain the roadways and the transit, et cetera. And most of the new capacity dollars that are in play are to support transit and active transportation. So there has been a significant shift, but for some, the pace of change is not fast enough. So we have this big tension that exists in our state policy conversations, and our regional policy conversations, and our local policy conversations.
Again, just to be provocative, maybe not so provocative, what I will say is that we have to recognize that this is a big region, and unless and until we build a ton of housing in the core where there's lots of transit, or we put a lot of jobs, you know, commensurate with it, there are large geographic swaths of greater Southern California that are not transit friendly, are never going to be transit friendly. And cars and roads and highways are not going away. And so they are going to continue to be part of the mix for probably most of the rest of all of our lifetimes. So.
For more about that, read Amy Lee's dissertation. Back to you.
Yep, I said, I promise it's not my question. I asked it and kept my job, so I'm okay. Okay, we have another anonymous, we have a few anonymous ones, but I'd like to kind of bring people in the room into this. But okay, I'll do one more anonymous one, and then please, you know, feel free to ask these questions. One is around how do issues such as homelessness or housing cause scope creep in agencies? Should it be the responsibility of transit agencies to provide social services, and are there financial implications?
Yes, and yes, and yes. There are people on our buses and trains who, I don't know whether they're homeless or not. You know, it's not a crime to be homeless and ride the bus or ride the train, but who make it uncomfortable for other people to ride. And if we are going to get our ridership back and grow our ridership, it would be irresponsible of us, and it would be counterproductive for us to not address that issue. We want there to be a great customer experience. And for some people, there's not a great customer experience. I used to be a regular transit rider. I'm not anymore for a number of reasons. That's not the only reason, but that's one of them. And that's just a reality. So we have to, and yes, it costs money. And if we want there to be development that is easier to serve by transit, then we also have to lean into the housing solution as well. There's no way around it. speaking for a transit agency.
I guess I'll add that I think I'm seeing evidence of this play out in terms of scope creep and budget implications and things that are outside of the purview of the transportation sector falling to transportation agencies as the frontline agency that is experiencing this. And I think libraries are another great example. It's not just transit, but there's like a few institutions in our public space that are the frontline industries for the frontline people who encounter and are faced with solving this challenge. And I'd be interested to just hear more about some of the partnerships that are most effective between housing and homelessness experts and transportation and transit experts, because I think if you ask transportation experts to solve housing and homelessness, it's really tricky. And if it were in the reverse, and I learned that people who are outside of the field of expertise in transportation were trying to solve transportation issues, my first question would be, why didn't you ask transportation experts to come weigh in? And so I think with that framing in mind, like, yes, definitely like seeing evidence of scope creep and transit agencies being charged with doing more of just public space management. But I am really interested to hear and maybe to collectively think about what kinds of partnerships we can elevate to bring other experts from other sectors who are thinking about housing and homelessness day in, day out into our spaces that can help build sort of, a more collaborative approach to solving that.
So I would just say, just to be clear, I do not think a transportation agency has to solve this.
Yeah.
We have to be part of the effort.
So I'll jump in here. The other question there was about housing. Metro, other transit agencies, the cities and SCAG all have a lot of public land. What do we do with that? And again, how does a transportation agency become a developer, or at least a manager of developers, and stay within its capacity?
Who's here from my TOC team? Where, Metro has approved this 10,000 unit initiative on Metro-owned land. 10,000 units is a lot. We've never done anything at that scale before. And again, it is part of a larger solution. We can't solve it, but it is part of a larger solution. And again, we're going to have to work with the local agencies who are going to say, yes, you can build this many units of this kind, or no, you can't.
We at SCAG, one of the programs I mentioned, we have a lot more resources now to focus on housing and housing planning. And so as part of a program we're rolling out right now, there are planning resources that have been awarded to counties and cities to look at their surplus lands and think about those as opportunities for housing. So it's definitely been an area that's been recognized as having wide potential. Some of those resources are now compromised, but hopefully we'll be able to move forward with them. Can I, on the scope creep question, I'll just also add to that. And because I think you see it in a lot of places, you see it, you're talking about the homeless issue, but also, in the work now with electrification, right? And so, you want the transportation agencies to also be thinking about grid, and do we have enough grid capacity? So in all of these, I guess, kind of speaking to the choir here, I just think the value of planning is so important. We tend to try to make every single project do every single thing, instead of looking at a community scale or a regional scale and developing a good plan and saying, hey, you know what, this is your role, this is your role, and this is your role, and this is your role. Let's work together. And I think we would achieve a lot more efficiencies in the way we allocate funding, and we just do our work if we could all be out there championing the important work of planning.
Amy, maybe.
Cool. This one's my question. Phoebe Chu, Events and Operations Coordinator at ITS. And I'm going to rephrase it a little bit differently than what I put in the Slido. But the question is about, kind of what are the strategies of bringing nuance into like these public type of conversations with like agendas. So to put it into context, I was a student government leader when I was an undergrad at UCLA. And there's a ton of issues at the university level too about student fee financing and, corruption going on over there, over here. And, you kind of want to bring those topics to, the council meeting agenda so that, you're talking about transparency. having students like be aware of all of these, different things affecting them. But when you bring those nuanced conversations in, you bring in a bunch of can of worms and, loss of allies sometimes too. And I'm just curious how, public agencies, public officials, kind of strategize on what happens behind doors and needs to be worked out behind the door versus what should be brought into the public sphere. So sorry, that was a long question, but.
So the work that we did for Lane Transit District, where we had a group of community steering members that came together for six meetings over the course of 6 weeks. And we had them kind of grapple with that question. And by and large, they wanted the transit agency to not shy away from tough conversations and not shy away from information that they felt traditionally it was hiding, and that if we could just be upfront about what are the true kind of confines or boundaries that we're asking folks to work in when we develop solutions, and we're upfront about that would actually build trust and have them have faith in the process. But the problems come through, like to your point, when we think that we have to have those conversations behind closed doors. That's where you get a lot of feelings of you're not being honest and forthcoming. There's certainly, I think, things that you could do to make that nuance clear. You could, I think there's, pretty standard practices of trying to avoid really technical language, trying to be very clear and speak in layman's terms for how does this affect you. But I would encourage us to even not try to think about the difference between what needs to happen behind closed doors and think about what are kind of like, what's the full spectrum of information that everyone needs to be working with.
The only thing I would add is that I would hope that there is broad agreement on the overarching goals and directions, and that you are maybe having these conversations, as Sarah talked about, on more of the details and the nuance. So hopefully there's agreement that like we're all going to try and go this way, and we're just sort of trying to figure out how to get there. That was my thought.
Phoebe, I'm really interested in the part of your question that asked about like loss of allies, because I think the goal of operating in a space of like radical transparency and everything happens in public, and everyone is aware of the constraints and parameters, which does include a lot of nuance and take a lot of time to, I think, build everyone to a collective level of understanding. I think there's still a challenge of what organizations or advocates can like publicly be with, that might be more successful to have those kinds of conversations behind closed doors in order to understand where those pinch points are, right? What you can say in public, what you can expect an organization to commit to in public, versus what they simply like can't be with publicly as the face of their organization. And I think we're in my observation about this is we're in a space of like pretty specific willingness to compromise, or an unwillingness to compromise on like values and mission and core purpose of organizations, and especially among I think among all kinds of organizations. And I think asking for radical transparency is great. And I think it brings up a lot of tension with like what kind of allyship you can expect across different kinds of organization when you're asking people to be committing to things in public in a radically transparent space when they just can't get behind it from their mission perspective. It's really tricky.
So on that nuanced note, I want to thank so much this wonderful panel we've had here.